everyone take a second to look around. There are 800 seats here, and we're going to assume there are 800 people here today. If you had to guess, of these 800 people, how many were affected with a developmental disability, or perhaps were the caregiver of someone with a developmental disability? How many would you say there were? 5? Maybe 10? 25? What if I told you 120? 120 of the 800 here have or are the caregiver of someone with a disability, at least hypothetically, because that is the statistic that came out in 2006 in a prevalence study done by the CDC. At that time, they found 15% of the population between the ages of 3 and 17 had a developmental disability. That's 1 out of every 6. That's really intense if you stop and think about it, right? Because that means you know more people with a developmental disability than you do lawyers or veterans, or actually both of those combined. So, what is a developmental disability, you might be asking yourself, because you can't imagine you know 1 out of every 6 people with a developmental disorder. Essentially, a developmental disability is something that occurs and it becomes apparent in early childhood development. It's a disruption of traditional or typical development. It can affect things like cognitive or intellectual functioning, gross motor skills, speech and language skills, behavioral issues. It covers the neurodevelopmental disorders such as ADHD and autism, which we know are on the rise. Now, as a matter of fact, you might be wondering what I would know about developmental disabilities and why we're here talking about it. Well, first of all, if we're talking 1 out of every 6, that means it's in your life whether you know it or not. So, I am a licensed independent social worker. I work in the field in private practice, working with children and families dealing with developmental disabilities. In addition to that, I'm also a parent. Now, the first half of my career, it's about 25 years ago, started, and my kids didn't come along until about halfway through that. I think I should probably tell you about my kids first of all. What mother doesn't want to do that, right? I have 2 boys. My 12-year-old is seriously the most hilarious person I've ever met in my life. He could be a stand-up comedian, but he wants to be a video game designer, so we'll let him do that. He's got long, dark hair. It's about as long as mine. He dyes the ends, manic panic, lizard green. He has autism, has played piano for the last 9 years. He has amazing Etch-a-Sketch skills. You should see that. He doesn't much like sports. He has big brown eyes, ADHD, and he surpassed me in height this year. Now, my 10-year-old is equally as funny, but in a more like a pesky little brother kind of way. He also has autism, and we call him the mayor of Dublin because no matter where we go, somebody seems to know him and they'll say hi. And I'm sure he would love to tell us more about who they were, but due to his severe childhood apraxia of speech, it renders him without the ability to tell us who they are. Kind of drives us crazy sometimes because he knows more people than I do, I think. He today won 2nd place in a bowling tournament, has significant cognitive impairments, and can free throw a basketball from almost anywhere in the gym despite being about this tall. Now, I hope you don't think that I'm trivializing my children's disabilities because I do take them very seriously. However, their disabilities define them about as much as their big brown eyes do. I'm not going to lie. It's not easy all the time, but no matter how hard it is for me, I guarantee you it's much more difficult for them. So I started off in the field 25 years ago as an undergraduate, and I was doing an internship, and they seemed to think it would be a good idea to send me into the inner city at 20 years old to teach a family how to raise their 3-year-old with autism. Now, at the time, it was the late 1980s. And that was a time when the autism prevalence rate was about between 1 in 2 to 4,000 versus the 1 in 68 that it is today. So we didn't know a lot about autism. We did not know a lot about how to treat autism, and we certainly didn't know the outcomes. So here I am sitting across the table from this woman. Her 3-year-old is in the corner, flapping his arms, screaming, and her husband is behind her, pacing, muttering under his breath, side-eyeing me, cigarette hanging out of his mouth. Needless to say, it was just a little bit intimidating. He walks into the kitchen, and the mother interrupts me, and she leans across the table, and she said, "Are you a parent?" "No." In fact, I was a child myself, really, at that point. And she said, my husband, he feels like you're an intruder. You don't belong here. You see, blacks and whites, we raise our children different. I think you're an intruder because you're not a parent. You can't possibly understand what it's like to parent a child day in and day out, let alone parent a child with autism. In that moment, I had a decision to make. I could move forward and teach her what I knew to teach her about autism. After all, that's why I was there. Or I could do what I did, and that was agree with her. And I said, yeah, I know, you're right. I'm not a parent, I'm not black, and I'm certainly not a parent of a child with autism. I can't possibly know what you guys go through every single day. Will you please tell me more about it? And she did. And for the next 6 weeks, she did. And actually, at the end of that 6 weeks, I have no idea if I taught her anything about how to raise her child. But what I do know is I recognize that she was her own expert. She's the one who knows her child the best. She's the one who knew her situation the best. And I honored that in the moment. Now, as I moved forward in my career and I got more confident with myself, I found myself listening less and less and holding myself a little bit more as the expert because, after all, I have fancy letters behind my name, so that's what I get to do. It wasn't until I had my own children and my experiences as a parent that I realized that I had a lot more listening to do. And that's why I'm here to tell you today. I'd like to talk to you about the 3 things that have been the most important that I have learned in the last 25 years of working in the field and also living in it. So the first thing I want to tell you is the fact that we all live as part of a system. We live in microsystems, which are smaller systems like our families, and we live in macrosystems. These are society as a whole and the communities that we live in. Now, in graduate school, they teach us how to do this thing called an eco-map. And oftentimes, as social workers, we'll sit down with our clients and we'll kind of map out aspects of people's lives and all of the systems they interact with to get a better understanding of where they view themselves and perhaps how we can best help. If you look up here, this is my eco-map for work. These are all the systems that I interact with on a regular basis for my work. And, I mean, there's a lot of stuff up there. I'm pretty busy. Now, I'd like you to take a look at this. This is my 10-year-old's eco-map. It's a little different, huh? These are systems that we deal with on a regular basis. So when we think about living in a system, there is an inequity that occurs if you have a developmental disability. You're already dealing with so many more systems than the general public, and we know how systems can sometimes break down. We have a lot more opportunity for that to happen in our world. Now, the other aspect of working in a system is there is no denying it. We are all part of an intricate system that works together. We all affect one another. So this is my family, and these are the systems that we work in. Now, on the outside of the bubble are all the systems that we interact with on a regular basis, and I guarantee you, again, at least hypothetically, you are in one of those bubbles. Now, the second thing ties in a lot to the first part, and that is that as human nature goes, we tend to look at things through our own lenses, our own worldview. Sometimes we can assign erroneous preconceived notions regarding other people's behavior. And there are really only 4 functions to any behavior, believe it or not. 1, to gain attention. 2, to gain access to something you want. 3, to escape a situation you don't want to be in. Or 4, you're responding to some kind of internal state or internal stimuli. You're hungry, you're tired, you're sick. You have a heightened emotional state. You have a cognitive delay. So when we see somebody behaving in public who has a developmental disability with a behavior that we don't understand, it's easy to assign a meaning to it that isn't there. If we see a child who is out of control in public, we might think, or screaming in public, we might think they're out of control, when really they're screaming out of joy or communication or sensory overload. When we see a parent who always seems very angry and they're fighting the system all the time and they always have something to say, we might just assume they're grieving. Or maybe they have a personality issue, when in reality, they haven't had a full night's sleep in 12 years. So sometimes we have to look at others' behaviors and erase our own worldview before making a judgment as to why they're doing what they're doing. Now, the third thing is the part we can all agree to and we all can relate to most, and that is the individual is their own expert. We all have the dignity to make choices for ourselves. Now, they may not always be good choices. Let's face it, who here has ever eaten a Cinnabon? It's not ever a good choice, but we do it, and we have the dignity to make that choice, and we have the dignity to live with our consequences. When we decide what's best for someone else, we're marginalizing them. And this happens so frequently with children and adults with disabilities. We decide for them what's best. We decide for the parent what they should be doing with that child. We're not allowing them to be their own expert when we do that. So it's these three things that are incredibly important to remember when we're thinking about us as a society, and the fact that here on World Autism Awareness Day, that in 25 years, the autism rate alone, not including any other developmental disabilities, has gone up 600%. This is not going to go away. So these three things, we all live in a system, we all affect one another. Everybody's behavior serves a function, and you may not understand what that function is. And the fact that we are all our own experts are all important to bear in mind. So what does this mean? What do we do about this? I'm going to teach you today, and it's just 2 words. Just ask. Ask. And for those of us on the receiving side, we have to tell. We can't stigmatize this anymore by not telling people what we need. And I know this is difficult. From the asking standpoint, we have to overcome our fears. We have to overcome our preconceived ideas about people. And for those of us who live with it, we have to not assume that people are trying to be rude when they ask. Everything should be assumed that is coming from a place of learning. My son and I went into a fast food restaurant not too long ago, and he loves French fries, and we went to the counter, and the woman at the counter greets us and says, "Hi, how you doing?" And he kind of jabbers inarticulately, and she looks at me with that look I'm used to getting, and so I looked back at him, and I said, "You can tell her I'm good today," and he did. And she looks at him again, she says, "What can I get you today?" Now that part caught me off guard, because I'm not used to people holding my child as his own expert. So I let it continue. And he said something, I wasn't sure, and she looked at him and said, "I think you said something about a cup of water. Did I get that right?" And he nodded, "Yeah." She said, "Well, that can't be all. What else can I get for you?" And he says, "The wise." She said, "Great. What size?" "Medium." She said, "Terrific. Cup of water, medium fries. Is there anything else for you today?" He shook his head no. Then she said, "Well, we put your name up on the screen. Can I get your name, please?" And he said it, but I'm not sure she understood him. So she asked him to spell it, and he did. And in that moment, she held all those values, all that dignity that we get for my son. She presumed competence. She gave him the dignity of time. She let him be his own expert and be part of our world equally. In my world, in my life, and many of your lives here today, we're not just disability. We're in that space between disability and society, because in my house, we're yogis and we're basketball players. We're human resource directors, social workers, basketball players, lovers of video games. We're brothers and we're parents. We're you. We just live in that space between. So I ask you today, if you go out from here and pass this along and you promise to ask, we promise to tell. Thank you.